My name is René Laennec, and my story begins in a small town in Brittany, France, where I was born in 1781. My childhood was not easy. I lost my mother when I was only 5 years old, and, soon after, my father, unable to care for me, decided to send me to live with my uncle, a respected doctor in the region. It was in his house that my destiny began to be forged. Surrounded by books and conversations about medicine, I soon discovered a passion for the human body and how science could alleviate people's suffering. The environment in which I grew up awakened my scientific curiosity and, from a very young age, I knew I wanted to follow in my uncle's footsteps. Eventually, I entered the University of Nantes, where I began my formal training in medicine. From the beginning, I was drawn to the study of pulmonary and cardiac diseases, areas in which medicine at the time was still full of uncertainty. As I observed patients, I realized how complicated it was to diagnose internal conditions without an effective way to see inside the human body. Physicians of my time relied on direct auscultation, that is, listening to the sounds of the body by placing the ear directly on the patient's chest. This technique was not only inaccurate, but also uncomfortable for patients and for the physicians themselves, especially in cases of large or female patients, where the situation could be awkward and ineffective. My studies took me to Paris, the heart of scientific thought at the time. There, I had the opportunity to learn from the best, but I also witnessed the limitations and frustrations that we physicians shared. We knew there was more to discover, more to understand, but our tools were rudimentary. We needed something more precise, something that could help us hear the sounds of the body clearly. Something that did not yet exist. This was the environment in which I was trained, a time when the potential of medicine was enormous, but the tools were limited. It was this frustration that planted the seed of invention in me. Despite the difficulties, I was determined to find a solution that could improve patients' lives and transform the way doctors diagnosed internal diseases. In the 19th century, medicine was at a crossroads. Although advances in anatomy and physiology allowed for a better understanding of the human body, the tools for diagnosing internal diseases remained primitive. Diagnosis of pulmonary and cardiac conditions, such as tuberculosis or pneumonia, depended almost exclusively on direct auscultation. Physicians, like myself, had to bring our ears close to the patient's chest to try to listen for internal sounds. But this method was, at best, uncomfortable and, at worst, inaccurate. The differences in the patient's complexion, the discomfort for both the doctor and the patient, and the difficulty in detecting subtle sounds greatly complicated the diagnosis. I clearly remember one of those days when I faced this limitation. A young woman came to my office, presenting classic symptoms of a pulmonary condition. However, when I attempted to auscultate her chest, I found myself in an awkward situation. Since she was a young woman, the idea of placing my ear directly on her chest was not only inappropriate for the time, but also inefficient due to the robustness of her build. I knew I could not obtain the necessary information with that method. It was at that point that I began to think seriously about a solution. I had observed that internal diseases needed to be detected more accurately and less invasively. Despite the limitations of the medical technology at the time, I refused to accept that this was the only way forward. I began to search for an alternative, a method that would allow the body's sounds to be heard more clearly, with less interference, and that would eliminate the need for direct physical contact. This problem became my obsession. I knew that a better diagnostic tool could completely transform medical practice. But what I didn't know was that, soon, a simple everyday accident would lead me to a discovery that would forever change the way doctors around the world would examine the human body. The inspiration for my invention came in a completely unexpected way. It was 1816, and I was walking through the streets of Paris when I observed some children playing with a piece of wood. One of them was scratching one end, while the other, by placing his ear on the other end, could hear the amplified sounds. At that instant, something sparked in my mind. If a wooden tube could amplify sounds, why not apply that principle to medicine? Upon returning to my practice, I decided to experiment with this idea. I rolled a piece of paper into a cylinder shape and placed it between my ear and the chest of one of my patients. To my surprise, I could hear the heart sounds much more clearly than before. The technique seemed to be working, but there was still much to be perfected. So, without wasting any time, I built a wooden prototype. It was a hollow tube about 30 centimeters long, which could be placed between the patient's chest and my ear. I called it stethoscope, derived from the Greek stethos, chest, and scopion, to observe. This instrument not only allowed better hearing of cardiac and respiratory sounds, but also solved the problems of discomfort and decorum I faced with my patients, especially women. The first time I used the wooden stethoscope on a patient, I knew I had found something revolutionary. The sound of the heart was clear and precise, and I was able to diagnose lung conditions with greater accuracy. It was as if, for the first time, I could see the inside of the human body through the sounds it produced. I could hear not only the heartbeat, but also the murmurs of the arteries and the breaths, with a clarity I had never experienced before. This new invention not only solved my problems, but offered a new way of understanding the human body. The stethoscope represented a bridge between the physician and the internal organs of his patients, something that had never been possible before. However, despite my enthusiasm, I had not yet imagined the global impact it would have on medicine.